again today. This is Cheyenne with Wise Apothecary. We're out and about for our introduction video filming for the Herb of the Month Club for December. This month we're studying spruce trees. There are about 35 different species of spruce and they all hybridize with each other, so it can be pretty tricky to figure out which exact spruce tree you have out in the wild. You never know who had babies with who. But I'll tell you some of the basic differences right off the bat. So in Alberta we have three main evergreen trees that are conifers. So we have fir trees, we have spruce trees, and we have pine trees. A lot of people call all evergreen trees pine, but they are not all pine. So when we look at the needles on the tree, that's the easiest way to tell the difference. You can get real complicated and in-depth into what the differences are in the evergreen trees. You can get into bark texture, color, shape. You can get into the way the branches grow off the tree, all sorts of things like that, but the easiest is all in the needle. So when we look at the spruce branches, you can see that they're all coming out one at a time, one needle at a time. So it's automatically not a pine tree. Pine has needles that come out in groups of 2, 3, or 5, and they are longer and softer, so they're not going to necessarily poke you when you walk by them. So automatically this is not a pine tree. So to figure out if it's a fir or a spruce, you actually take one of the needles off. Once you have one of the needles, you do a simple test. If you can roll it between your fingers like I can, it is a spruce tree because it has square needles. If it is a flat needle that you cannot roll, it's a fir tree. So just to summarize all of that for you, fir has flat needles, spruce has square needles that you can roll, and pine has many needles coming out of one point. So, not a pine tree, not a fir tree, we're dealing with spruce. In terms of survival uses, fir, pine, and spruce can all be used interchangeably. They all can provide rope, they can all provide good wood for burning, they provide resin, they provide foods, and all sorts of things like that. But when you're getting more into the medicine aspect of it, that's when it's a little bit more dependent on what species you have. And also where they grow as well. So for instance, wild wilderness trees would be a little bit more nutrient rich than some of the inner city trees, and they would also have less pollution out in the country. This is an in-city tree, just gonna give that away right now. So other than the needle, some quick ways to tell that you have spruce is actually in the cone. So this is a cone I picked up off the ground just to show you. When the cone has been pollinated, it actually hangs down from the bottom of a branch like this. So if you look up into the tree, up at the cones at the top, you'll see that they hang down off the bottom of the branch. That's just another way to tell. They're kind of longer and slimmer cones as well. There are tons and tons and tons and tons of uses for spruce, fir, and pine trees. In terms of survival and emergency situations, spruce is #1 tree that you should know about. So you can get just about everything you need from it. So one of the first things I want to focus on just to show you is the resin. So this is the resin here from some of the trees in the area here. This is actually almost like a syrupy honey that they kind of leak out when there's a wound on the tree bark. Contrary to popular belief, resin or pitch is not the same thing as sap. So a lot of people call this sap. Sap is inside the tree and has lots of sugars and is kind of a food source for the tree. Pitch has no sugars in it and is actually antimicrobial for killing off different invaders that may be trying to get into the tree's wound. So different parasites, viruses, bacterias, funguses, parasites, things like that. So you can get quite a lot of things that want to sneak into the tree wound. So it leaks this so that nothing can get in. If anything goes onto the tree wound, it gets stuck in the resin and they don't get anywhere and they actually die off. This resin, as you can refer to the spotlight card that I made, this resin is very useful. It's useful for flavoring, it's useful as a fire starter, it's useful for dental hygiene, it's good for the sore throats and bronchial complaints, all sorts of things like that. But one of my favorite things is actually as a chewing gum. You can actually just take a piece, start chewing on it into a chewing gum. It freshens your breath. It's pretty tasty. It's kind of an acquired taste. But yeah, it's really good for oral hygiene and for sore throat, letting that leak down. So the more mature needles on the tree are useful as well, but they're considered more of an emergency food, so short-term use. In the springtime, so in a couple months here, we're going to have new growth growing on the end called spruce tips. Spruce tips are soft, they are super tasty, and they're very high in vitamin C, which comes in in early spring, so right after winter. So it's going to be there to help replenish vitamin C stores for people that need it, who have kind of suffered without the vitamin C all winter long. So it's there and ready and available. Spruce tips are awesome for all sorts of things, for liqueurs, jellies, stews, teas, ice cream, all sorts of different things you can use with spruce tips. So very, very flexible in how you use them. The immature cones, so later into the summer, the immature female cones can actually be, you can peel the outside and use the center portion and actually roast it. And it creates like this sugary, syrupy treat that is very delicious. And it can be worked into foods or just eaten as is. It's quite flexible in how it's used. In terms of survival, the wood on spruce trees is good for burning and building with. You can use the branches for insulation on the ground. Never sleep directly on the ground, even in the middle of summer. There are people who've died from hypothermia in the middle of summer because they slept directly on the ground. So you've got to be careful. Never sleep directly on the ground because the ground will suck all the heat out of you, no questions asked. So you can do, a half foot or a foot of branches underneath of you to help insulate from the ground. And you can also wrap them around you, kind of like a spruce taco is what I call it, just to help you kind of keep in some of your warmth when you need to survive the night. The roots are useful. They're used in flavoring things like root beer, more historically than modern times, but there are modern root beers that use spruce root. They also useful for making rope. So if you just need some rope, you can actually just pull out the small little roots and use them as rope as is, or you can make a longer term rope by drying it out a little bit and fraying it and weaving it and braiding it into actual rope that will last a long time. So you can get a whole lot of goodness from spruce. I would be careful of where you're harvesting, especially if you're going to be eating it or using it medicinally, because you don't want pollution or any sort of like contamination. Now, the good thing to know is that spruce trees don't grow in polluted areas. They will die off. So if they are growing and healthy, it is a good indicator that it is an alright area to harvest from usually. Make sure that you're following local laws and make sure you're asking permission from the land, from the landowners, and from the plants themselves. So basically you got food, medicine, and shelter all from one tree. This is a tree that grows all over Alberta in varying species and in various ecosystems. You'll usually find it near water. Their roots like to have wet feet. So what you cannot see in the camera is that we actually have water behind us, a river behind us, a pond over here. So you know that their roots are getting some of the water. So thanks so much for joining me again. Feel free to subscribe to see more videos, to join the Herb of the Month Club. We have a free membership option on Facebook, or we have paid for memberships on our website at wisewoodapothecary.com. They do make a great gift, just throwing that out there. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a great day.